How are you?
Fantastic. I hope you're too. Do you want to have the honor of introducing Moti? I mean, not that anybody has to introduce Moti because, you know.
Because he's Moti.
Okay.
Yeah. I'll do it. Okay, no problem.
Tell me if you see my shared screen.
Not at the
Not
moment.
yet.
I'm sharing. It should be your entire screen, application window, Chrome tab. I share Chrome tab. I share. Worked before.
That's what they always say.
Yeah, everyone says that. Every speaker. You can't get them. Oh, I've worked before.
Now at least
Hey.
the title.
Yes. Fantastic.
There we go.
Oh.
And I'll try to do in present mode, and you tell me if you see.
That's even more perfect.
Fantastic.
Yes, I don't see myself, so you tell me if I show in the picture, in the corner.
Anyone, depending on how they've set up their Zoom, they can see you. So I can see you, but your slides are on the main screen. So that's absolutely perfect.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is the mini.
It's not taking up the full screen for me, but I guess.
But that's because the aspect ratio.
Yeah, maybe.
It's they're wide slides rather than, it depends on your screen size. Obviously, Moti builds his slides on a cinema screen.
Yeah.
You're in cinema ratio, you're like really wide.
Yeah. So just bump into the talk and tell me 10 minutes, 5 minutes, because I'm trying to put a little watch here. I'll go locate something.
So he's even managed to make the title match up with what's on the website. TBA.
Maybe he just made up a whole line of research in the past few weeks to match this.
I think he may have done.
That would definitely mean a good reason to be an invited speaker, right? If you can come with a cool research direction just to meet the random abbreviation.
Yeah, probably in the last 4 days, because I think until then he was very busy with all this contact tracing stuff with Google.
I see.
Yeah, it's sorry about that. It's like I was really busy with many other things. I started doing it very late, and then all the social unrest started, and the ugliness started in the US, and not the best of times socially. I'm a scientist, but I'm also interested in what's going on in society.
Yeah, it's really interesting to see that from over here, what's going on in the United States right now. Yeah, all that's happening in Denmark is that we're fighting with the Swedes about if they're allowed to come to Denmark or not. So that's currently the biggest problems that we have. So we're really blessed when it comes to that.
It's the same argument that it has been for the last few centuries then.
Yeah, it's fine. Right? Nothing ever changes, right?
Okay, what's the time? Well, we've got about 3 minutes to go. We haven't got that many people signed in.
No. Yesterday it was quite a bit quieter than most of last week.
That was also because, I guess, because half of the Danes for sure were missing, right? It's like basically half of Aarhus was missing because it was a holiday, and I guess it was a holiday
That's true.
in Europe.
Yeah.
Holiday, also PKC is going on in parallel.
Yeah, that's another problem.
Yeah.
And right now, actually, Yuval is giving a competing invited talk at PKC.
Wow.
I don't know if anyone's monitoring the views of that to see which gets more.
I'm gonna have it
on YouTube after.
Yeah.
In there. Yeah.
I would be surprised if everyone would be at PKC, right?
Yeah.
Once I gave a last talk in a conference, and I started the talk by saying that there are two bad reasons to give the last talk in a conference. The first reason is half the people are already on the way to the airport. The second reason is that I myself am not on the way to the airport.
Yeah.
It's fair.
Right. Oh no, it's not worth going yet. We've still got a few minutes.
Okay.
And everyone's coming in at the last minute anyway. Oh, 70 people are on PKC and counting, apparently.
Tough competition.
Someone is actually monitoring both feeds. Thank you, Cyprian, wherever you are. How can you know that actually you're not here, so how do you know I asked that question?
Is he watching on YouTube, maybe? I guess you can't have two Zoom windows open.
Okay,
so you can have one Zoom and one YouTube.
Yeah, that's true. We've got people on YouTube as well. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Or sign in the other Zoom on your phone, right?
Yeah, but then you see the name, yeah?
That's true.
Yeah. Oh, would you want me to wait a few minutes, Peter, or what? What's up to you?
Maybe it's okay to start now.
Okay.
Yesterday we were a little bit rushed with everything running late, so it's nice to try.
Yeah, Cyprian's watching on YouTube. So hello to everyone in YouTube land. Hello to everyone in Zoom land. If you want to know, if you're in Zoom land, you can see the lovely picture of the lovely castle behind me. This is just one of the many castles we have in Belgium. So if you want to come and work with us in Leuven and see these beautiful castles, please come and do so. But let's go on to the main event of the day, which is Motti Young, who is, well, actually basically needs no introduction, but he's going to talk about the big bad adversary. So over to you, Motti.
Thank you very much, Nigel. So I'm sorry for not publishing a title and an abstract. I was a little bit busy, but it's TBA, so it's still TBA, the bad adversary, dealing with malice, not in the streets of New York or Minneapolis, but in private set intersection cardinality sum problem. And I will talk about the problem, motivation that will be based on the honest but curious solution. And then I will talk about how to move to deal with malicious adversary when you really care about efficiency. And then this will give us some design methodology and general way to talk about protocols. So essentially, this talk is based on two two papers. The first one on deploying secure computing commercially, private intersection sum. It was supposed to be in EuroS security and privacy in March, but the conference was delayed, but it's available on ePrint. And the second one is two-sided malicious security for the same problem, which will appear in crypto. So, okay, so maliciously secure, or sometimes we, instead of saying maliciously secure, we just say malicious. We don't want private set intersection with of cardinality and sum. And let's start with looking at the problem and the motivation for the problem. So think about two players, Google and a merchant who's called Macy's. So they have list. They have list of, set of users. Let's say these are their names, and they want to compute the private set intersection. And they're engaged in a protocol. And at the end, since the common elements in the list are Bob and Eric, they both compute Bob and Eric. I think this is a very well-known problem. Everybody knows, almost everybody knows set intersection and private set intersection. It's been and is being in research for quite a while. It's a specialized protocols of secure computing. And it is an interesting problem, and this shows you an e-commerce setting between two e-commerce players, how they can use it.
Could just a minute, Motti? We've still only got your title slide on the screen. Is that correct?
You want me to restart?
No, just go. Yeah, just get to. Yeah, it's okay. Just go through the slides. You see, are the slides not advancing your side? I've only seen that. We can only see the title slide.
1 second. Oh, something is wrong. So I'm sharing a window now. Do you see the title slide?
We don't see anything shared at the moment.
Interesting. I share the screen again.
Nope, nothing sharing.
1 second. I'm correcting it. 1 second.
Okay.
I'm sorry for that. Now it should be okay.
Wait a sec. It's starting. It's starting. Very slow. Very, very, very slow. Yeah. Okay. Now see if you can advance the slide. That's the title screen. Yeah. Now we're
Outline.
there. Yeah. Good. 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 Okay. Thank
So
you.
outline, let's talk about it. I will define the problem. The main problem of interest is private set intersection cardinality sum. I'll talk about motivation, efficient and design. I mentioned the two papers on which it is based. They are both going to appear. The ePrint number is here. The first one presents the problem and deals with the benign case, honest but curious, and the second one is the bulk of this talk about malicious. What do you do in the malicious case when they are mutually suspicious party and they want to follow the protocol, and you still want to run it as efficient as possible, and there's no free lunch, you have to work for it. Okay, and then I said what is the problem and why, and people are actually know what the problem is, but Nigel, do you see the intersection calculated?
Yes, I do. I see everything. It's perfect.
Yes. So you see that Bob and Eric are in the intersection. Eve is not in the intersection, so she is not calculated, and Dave is not, and so on. So this is it. It's a very well-known problem, and it's just here put in the context of two companies that want to compute something in common. And the public set intersection cardinality, what we want to calculate is essentially, since it's Bob and Eric, we want the two parties to just calculate the number 2, the size of the intersection, obviously. And and PSI, public set intersection augmented with sum, is the case that one of the parties have associated with it, with the element of the set, certain numbers, and you want to calculate the sum of the intersection element. So it's Bob and Eric, 10 plus 120. If I'm not mistaken, it's 130. So this is what you want to calculate. And these problems apparently, size and sum are interesting commercial entities that people want to calculate. Often the cardinality, but at some points also the sum, and this helped parties over the internet who are engaged in some e-commerce arrangement to understand whether the arrangement is working or not. Because there is some affinity program on behalf of Macy's that Google runs, and they want to show how effective it is. And on the other hand, there is, first of all, user privacy. You cannot, and commercial trade secrets that they don't want really to share the data. And that was the idea to produce, to use cryptographic protocols to this end. And of course, you want there is a need to do it efficiently, and let's start with the honest but curious case. So assume the two parties, they are still G and M as before. They will change name soon, and the first solution that comes, the first actual solution for this problem was based on commutative encryption. So you see on the first flow, G has a bunch of has its list G1 to Gn. So it encrypts it with its commutative encryption element and sends it to the other side to M. It's blue here, so M takes its commutative encryption key and applies to this set, and you get this F to the G to the GI, and also it takes its set F of M1 up to F of Mn, and the associated encryption here, and send it back to the other side. And notice that the doubly encrypted set is sent shuffled. So G sends a vector of elements, and he gets this vector of elements shuffled after f of m is applied to it, and the set of m. And then it picks up the red set f of m1 up to f of mn and applies to it its encryptor, and it gets the doubly encrypted element of m. And because of commutativity, f of g is g of f. These two elements are encryptions of the elements, and then G can find the intersection size by finding matches between GF of GI and FG of MJ. If they equal, the original number was there. This is commutative encryption. Before we go, so in case M does not shuffle the set, in case it doesn't shuffle the case, G, because it remembers the positions of the original G1 to Gn, when it calculates the matching, it can actually calculate the set intersection. If it shuffles it, it loses the original value and only counts the number of matches. Of course, everything is proven. I'm not just saying it. And this is a way to get two birds with one stone, and it's always good for practice. If you can, with a little change in the protocol, get it to be multi-use, it's good. So assume we do the shuffle, so it only count matching, and it gets the intersection, the sum. And now to continue and get the cardinality, and now to continue and getting the sum, each element here that was in the matching has an associated E of Si with it, and this is an additive homomorphic encryption that M holds. G knows how to pick the right encryptions, multiply them, and he gets the encryption of the sum. He doesn't want to reveal to M, so it blinds it with E of R of the right of its choice of the right size to blind all the other elements, the sum, sends it to the other, multiply E of R into the blinded sum, to blind the sum, send it to M. M has the decryption key, and it sends back S, which is the sum of the blinding factor and the actual elements associated with matching elements, which elements in the set. And this paradigm of tagging those elements in the matching enables us to calculate the right sum. Of course, G, who contributed R, knows how to subtract R and gets the actual sum. So this was the solution, and there are a few nice things about this solution. The work explains the business context for it, and how you can have business problems that look simple. Nobody knows how to solve it, and they require interesting cryptographic innovation, and what properties are easier to push when proposing a solution in a business context. Why did it take so long, and what was needed? It's part of the paper. We put it in order to spill a little of the beans out, not all of them, but whatever we could. And why in around 8 years ago, well, I decided that crypto that computes, namely secure computing, rather than just communication secrecy, is the time to put it in business. And certainly this event is organized by Aarhus, which is a pioneering, one of the pioneering places for bringing practicality into secure computing. So the status of this work is that there are variants of it, it's implemented, and it runs routinely, I can say every day, and it shows the usefulness of the crypto R&D group. And it has now extended uses, some of which Payman talked about last week, because some of the cryptography was also open sourced, and other companies can use it. And we are happy that privacy overall is augmented with this contribution. And indeed, a lot of basic cryptography is available open source, but the specific, more what other people call fancy crypto and what we call crypto, and not even advanced crypto, is not yet there, and it's good to advance the state of the art. I know there are now libraries that do fully homomorphic encryptions and things like this, but sometimes even very simple elements that appear in many cryptographic papers for years, they are not available in the open. And then when you need to design something fast and demonstrate that it's useful, because not always in business you get an open wide window of opportunity. The window is actually very short, and there are many opponents. Of course, there are many proponents, many opponents, and you need to perform and get things right, and you have to invest time and energy in it. So that's the state of this. Technically, if you look at it, the work uses a Poly-Hellman 76, which is now called Diffie-Hellman style commutative encryption. The commutativity of this function was pointed out in a paper by Shamir in 1980, in which he uses it to demonstrate how you can do equality. Elliptic curve cryptography was not yet at the time, so it was done over just simple number theoretic, elementary number theoretic problems. For additive encryption, the open source include Payet, and we did also experiments with other additive homomorphic things. And of course, it has variant, and of course, now it is implemented over elliptic curves. There are various protocols with various flaws, but with O, not with A. Because we have proofs of security, and in the 80s you didn't need to have proofs to publish papers, so we had to complement what Poly-Hellman needed to do in 76 and Shamir in 80. So we did all this, and that's it. So it's nice. So one other interpretation of this work is that the double exponentiation can be viewed as a distributed Oblivious PRF. That the two-party computes under the message, which is first hashed. That's actually the way to look at it. And of course, the exponents are secret, so it's more like a PRF, actually PRP, and the distributed Oblivious PRFs have been used before, so it is shown secure under H, the hash function being random oracle, and the DDH assumption in the group, and distributed Oblivious PRFs actually have been used in this context by a number of other works. And shuffle, the distributed Oblivious PRF, is when one party shuffles randomly and it leads to the cardinality. by shuffling, and so you can only tag the entries, so it doesn't really compute. It's a little bit an extended functionality in which it doesn't really tell you just the cardinality, but it also tags the elements that are in common without knowing which elements they are. But this enables us to extend it to the sum by picking the associated elements. Okay, so as I said, Shamir used it to show equality check, and equality is the poor man's private set intersection. And other nice properties of this: it's flexible, it's scalable. You can run it when the two sizes are long and are large, or when one side is small. Important for cloud, if you have a cloud, that these are parallelizable because it's a vector computation. You can do incrementality, and it has very, very nice flexibilities that you may need in business applications. So it's not that we design something to solve a problem, but we actually design essentially a library to adapt it per needs. And that's if you work for industry, you probably know this, that this flexibility and agility is actually needed, and this implementation has it. Okay, so this was all nice and good, and this can be run when the elements are honest but curious. And there are enough business partners and business contracts in which the assumption that elements taking part in the protocol are honest, but you have to do actual risk management and decide with which party you want to run it, under what legal conditions, and so on. And it's, of course, much better to have a malicious PSI with extension to cardinality sum, and essentially have a library of solution of possible adaptations that give different solutions under the assumptions that the parties do not trust each other. You still write a contract and so on, but your risk management analysis does not rely on the other party to do the right thing, but you force the other party to take part in a protocol in which you are sure of that even if the other party is malicious and doesn't want to follow the protocol, it has to. Okay, so we want to retain the efficiency. So which means we don't want to use generic methods. In some sense, all malicious for plausibility, for feasibility result, you always have the GMW result that any protocol with commitments and zero knowledge and so on can be made into to cope with malicious adversary. There were many solutions for one side being malicious, or one side computing the interaction and intersection, and the other side being malicious. But we wanted the two sides to compute the intersection, and if you follow these protocols that were designed for one side malicious, then one side compute the intersection, it has to bring it to the other side, and just bringing it to the other side and proving that it's the right set makes the protocol typically inefficient. So it has been essentially a challenge. And of course, we want the extension, and the question is how to implement it. So we want to extend it while retaining the nice properties that I mentioned before, efficiency and other properties. So we need components that compute together and allow participant easiest way to convince in zero knowledge the other party that the protocol is being followed. And we want the symmetry, as I said, and we want efficiency and retaining properties. So it's the strict requirement for composing special components that smoothly together achieve robustness and performance. So now we have as a blueprint, as a plan, the honest but curious, and it has very nice properties, which some of them I didn't speak about, but I mentioned just a few. And we want to retain it. So we know what we want. We now we have to put the components together. So it's like it feels like you have to create a symphony. You know, all the notes are known, the goal is known, the instruments are known. There are plenty of cryptographic protocols. There are many zero knowledge procedures and so on. And you need to put it together and do the right orchestration and so on and so forth. And this is what, after it was done, this is the way I felt like, even though I don't know nothing, I don't know anything about composing music, but I know something about composing cryptographic protocol under strict requirement. That is hard, and when it's done right, then the task and the results are satisfying. So this is the idea, and this was the plan. So so what's the protocol for malicious party, and what was achieved? And this is next. So protocol design for malicious. So we have two party. And now, instead of distributed Oblivious PRF, which has nice properties like parallelization, we want to do malicious distributed Oblivious PRF. So distributed Oblivious PRF implies PSI, just by the two parties applying their keys, like in the honest but curious. Then, if you add a shuffle on the separated elements, you can get cardinality, as was shown also by the protocol. And if you have associated elements that are encrypted correctly, you can do the PSI sum. And we will have to develop the malicious shuffle distributed OPRF, the composition, and improve the performance as much as possible, or so orchestration. And I will talk about mainly about these two elements, the two reductions to PSI and PSI cardinality. So we will have distributed Oblivious PRF and two parties. Now I call them S and R. And they want to compute together the function on the elements coming from either side, which were, remember, these two elements. They all have a key. The key is distributed, two-party distributed Oblivious PRF. And if they have it, they can compute they apply the distributed part computation on the two elements. And now, without shuffling, without anything, they both can see the matching and know the intersection. And if it's shuffled, if they apply the function to the two sets and they shuffle the sets, they permute it. And this is Macy's permuted and Google's permuted. Now they can just count matching and we get the cardinality. And of course, if there is associated sum, we can get the sum. So the rest of the talk, I hope to cover in a very general terms, the malicious shuffle distributed Oblivious PRF, SDORF, and the optimizations that were done in order to squeeze out more performance out of this protocol. And And the first thing to look is the distributed oblivious PRF that was used in the malicious thing. In the that we can use in the malicious thing, it cannot be the one that we used for the honest but curious. Why? Because we have a random oracle hash h of m to raise to the k in the right group. So raising to the k in the right group is fine. But the fact that you do a random oracle hash and you want to prove that you raise it to the right exponent, it's not friendly with efficient zero-knowledge proofs. We want something much more algebraic. So we see immediately how the components for the honest but curious fail on the start. So we have to work hard and to find the right component. And we're working hard for so you don't have, so that the protocol can be run smoothly. And the principle is the design carefully, get efficiency overall. So we have to change the distributed oblivious PRF, and there is one that first appeared by Bonnet and Boyan, which is f of k of an argument x is g to the 1 over k plus x, and this is one to use, and this is proven in the inverse Diffie-Hellman assumption, and it was used by Dodis and Yampolsky to do a to have a threshold PRF, and we had to modify it a little bit for the security proof, but it's beyond the scope. You can see it in the paper. So the input is X, there is a key, and this is computed. And if we want it to be a distributed PRF, then we have to just split the key, and then it becomes G to the 1 over the first key plus the second key plus the argument. And this is the distributed oblivious PRF that we are going to use. But you know, it involves some computation. It's algebraic, nice, but it involves some computation, and you have to support it. You have to compute this. And so in particular, the parties have to come with and commit to their keys, K1 and K2. And then they have to perform the evaluation of the function. So let's say it's computing elements of R here on the right side. So it starts by having an homomorphic encryption and S encrypting with this homomorphic encryption the key K1, the key of the oblivious PRF, and then the idea is that R will add its key and its input element to the homomorphic computation, and this, because the other side S owns the secret key, they can interpret this value, invert it, and raise G to this value. So of course, doing it directly reveals too much to S, so we have to do something. And the idea is to employ homomorphic, to not send directly what I showed before, just K1 plus K2 plus X, but to homomorphically blind it under the encryption, taking K1 plus, so it was encryption of K1, so adding K2 plus X to it, multiplying to it random factor R1 and adding the group order times R2 and sending a second element, which is G to the R1. And note here that if S now decrypts and inverts the element in the second flow under the homomorphic encryption, it gets, after it inverted, it gets 1 over K1 plus K2 plus X to the R1 plus Q to the R2, which is the blinded element, so it doesn't learn X and K2. And then when it takes G to the R1, the second element on the second flow in the right group, the Q to the Q times R2 cancel because it's the order of the group and it equals 1. And under the encryption in the under the raising to the exponent exponentiation, you actually get G to the K1 plus K2 plus X because G to the R1 cancel the other blinding factor R1. The order cancels R2, the blinding factor cancels R1, and we get the evaluation of the result. So here is the idea how to use this.
Motti,
Yes.
why do you add Q times R2? Because surely S decrypts and could just take it mod Q anyway, because she knows Q. So surely Q plus R2 doesn't give any security for R.
It's not true. It's not true. It helps because these are different groups. So when the decryption takes place, this is done modulo, and the homomorphic encryption is Kameny-Shoup encryption.
Yeah.
And then the G is completely another. I'm missing a few steps here. But
Okay, no problem.
This is yeah. You will see there are things that you know at the first pass I cannot give you all details, but look at the ePrint paper. It has all the algebra right.
Okay, no problem.
So it has also size constraints, like it has to be a larger envelope in which the actual thing does not live. It has to be, the decryption gives you an integer. It's larger than the inverted exponent itself, and this is how R2 comes into being. So it's as I said, it's a very sensitive thing, and you have to do the right elements. And of course, you have to do a malicious one, so it has to be accompanied by zero-knowledge proofs. So you have a commitment to K1, you prove in zero knowledge that you send an encryption of K1 under your own homomorphic encryption. And every action has its own zero-knowledge proof, and this is how we get it to be malicious. There are various details that you have to read about, but I gave you hints. Okay, and then this gives you the we do the same thing. So this is the major building blocks. We do it for the element X of K2. We don't do it just for one element. It's a vector computation. We do it for the elements Y of S in the other direction with another Kameny-Shoup homomorphic encryption. And this computes eventually the distributed oblivious PRF on both sets, and then you can find the intersection. And what if you need to do only cardinality? Then you need to shuffle the distributed OPRF. I said we want to keep the basic plan, the basic blueprint from the honest but curious. So you have to essentially add, so I pushed here 2 slides, one explaining the Kameni-Shoup encryption, which I already explained that it's not over the same group. It has size constraints and different algebraic domains, and you have to be careful. It's not something that you can gloss over the math and just do crypto by symbol manipulation. And you have to transfer it from that domain to the El-Gamal encryption, over groups where the inverse Diffie-Hellman holds. And then you add here a zero-knowledge proof of shuffling and kind of commitment between this final element and this encryption and commitment to G to the R. It's another zero-knowledge proof. Shuffling proofs are known. Growth works a lot on this domain to do it efficiently, and we can pick an efficient component. So we have zero-knowledge argument for shuffling. We use the Bayer growth, which is essentially you have homomorphic encryption that you can multiply 2 encryptions and get the encryption of the multiplication. And it essentially uses take encryption of 1 and randomizes each ciphertext, and then you have to prove permutation. And this Bayer growth is essentially the state of the art. Zero-knowledge argument for shuffling. So the protocol stages, just to recap a little bit, and I didn't tell all the things. You need, of course, to initialize a malicious protocol, one-time initialization. So the parties have to agree on a group, on the structure of the distributed oblivious PRF, for which they can choose different keys in different runs or different set of runs. And each come up with Kameni-Shoup encryption and an associated Pedersen commitment and El-Gamal encryption. Everything is accompanied with correct proof. And they also do 2 out of 2 threshold homomorphic encryption to encrypt the associated values for intersection, for set intersection cardinality sum that I didn't cover. Of course, per run, the shuffle DPRF with integrity assurance has to be run on both sets. And only then they can pick the right elements encrypted under the 2 out of 2 threshold homomorphic to calculate the sum. And then each of them has half encrypted, provably half encrypted result. They send it to the other side with the proof, and then the other side can complete with its own key, its own half of the key, the different halves, each of them with a different half, and they get the same sum. So, so of course, all stages have zero-knowledge argument of knowledge associated with them. For the implementation, it was done for efficiency under the Fiat-Shamir. And we have the shuffle proof. We have range proofs because the ranges of the choice of the parameters are important for the blinding and so on. And at some point we move an encryption from the Kamenish Shuk to El Gamal, and they all need proof of knowledge, and these are very interesting in themselves, but they are specializations of known techniques. And this is the way we achieve the first version of the symphony with all these components. And next, we need to optimize for performance, and we get into optimization techniques, which are batching to gain performance. And this also gives us parameters for different size of batching, in which we can optimize the protocol, whether we want to reduce communication and computation, and there is a trade-off in how much batching you do. But I will just describe you the batching techniques, which are interesting variants to gain optimization in our context. Our context is a vector computing, so you have a lot of things that go on in parallel, and you can batch them and minimize communication, or you can run them in small batches and reduce the computation per each element. So you can play with this, and this is a nice performance study that you need to do. But here are the techniques. So for example, you can batch commitments by vector commitments. So you have like Pedersen, which is G to the M, H to the R for random R. But if you have different generators, you can pack into the same value many messages, M1, M2, and so on. And you can just compute G1 to the M1 times G2 to the M2, etc., and blind it with H to the R. You can batch the Kamenish Shuk encryption by reusing the first element on many. So you know, it's like it's a combination of El Gamal and Payet, very clever encryption method. So you can take the first element and G to the R and use it in many messages. We also the work also gave another batching technique, which is based on the Jurek-Damgard extension of Payet. We extend the Kamenish Shuk in a similar way by instead of working modulo n square, working modulo ns and packing more messages inside. So it is possible, because I told you that the Kamenish Shuk is a combination, is a Payet El Gamal, very nice extension. And we also batch Sigma protocols in this work. And if you see a Sigma protocol for proving knowledge of so this is essentially a Schnorr protocol. When you prove you have G to the R and you know R, and you want to show that you know X, and then you run Sigma protocol Schnorr style, and you show that this demonstrates X. So batching you can do again with you have, instead of G to the X, you have G to the X1 up to G to the Xn as input. You have G to the R that you know the discrete log of, and then you are challenged n times, but you can send back a compressed representation, which you verify this way, knowing the CIs and the relations that is supposed. And we have a proof that this show you in the same way that Schnorr shows you for one, this show you altogether for all these elements. So I'm essentially on time, I see, at least. So all these exercises, and I didn't cover in depth all this work. The paper, as I said, as I showed at the beginning, is available on ePrint, and it's been a number of years, a number of summer internships in our group. First, Seth Karn, who is now a member of the group, was an intern who worked on it for a number of years. And then when he joined the group, Beihan Miao, who is currently with Visa, was a summer student, and she worked hard to put everything together. And I wanted just to mention and give them the credit for hard summers. And you will see the details if you look at the paper. And it's nice. Summer internship also forced the intern to put a lot of effort, and this requires a lot of effort in a short time. And this is the power of summer internship. So performance, what did we achieve? So malicious versus honest but curious. The version that minimizes communication does 6 times more. This is 6 times more work, more communication, compared to the honest but curious blueprint for the malicious. And when minimizing computation, we get 25 times more than the malicious computation that I showed you at the beginning. And this is a relatively this shows you the gain, because if we just took the honest but curious and had to prove that SHA-256 was applied correctly in zero knowledge to an element and raised to a power, this would be already much more than this. And this this shows you that all these great efforts and great combination and getting this symphony done was worth it. So this is the extra payment, multiplicative extra payment of the malicious versus the honest. Now there are not many protocols for symmetric malicious, and the one to compare against is the sort compare shuffle paradigm of Wang, Evans, and Katz from 2012. And our cost is 64 times now better. Here, this 6 and 25 is how much we had to pay compared to the honest, and this is how much we gain compared to the other malicious contender in the marketplace. And this is 64 times better for a 1,000,000 entry case. So this was implemented and checked against the other implementations. It works. So the summary: we know that malicious models are more costly. It's a very popular subject now. We heard a few talks about it in this meeting. With hard work, one can attempt to narrow the gap. So this is the working hard so you will not have to. So we work hard on the design so that the actual implementation will not have to work hard. It requires not just adding integrity, but revising tools, adding sensitive component driven by the need of integrity via zero knowledge. So we know that we have to cope with malicious. We have a generic tool family, which is zero knowledge proofs, and we work to integrate them the right tools. And this means that also the protocol has to change and integrate the right tools that work together with the integrity zero knowledge tool. So it gives rise to the integrity by design principle. So you design component and compose component that are easy to demonstrate in zero knowledge the validity of actions. And I think this is a very important paradigm for the very popular subject of malicious security. Another thing to note is that practical problems often lead to interesting questions which demand broad knowledge of the field. We have to know various encryptions, zero knowledge, and batching, and proof of all kinds of zero knowledge proofs, and we had to do it to put them together. And putting things together always leads to problems. For example, the Dodician-Polski PRF is good for polynomial size domain, and we had to extend it and change the proof in some sense to exponential domain, because we cannot force the user to have sets of small size in our case. So there is a need to adapt. And the interplay of theory and practice is important, especially as cryptography becomes useful to system in our days. And this is why we started all this, and we started the group in Google, because the requirements of e-commerce on the web, which is cooperations between different companies, definitely now the cloud computing, privacy requirements, which are very important, security requirements, and many, many others, that now the internet is just gaining momentum. I believe it has many other applications and requirements for advanced cryptography. Now with Internet of Things, it's another things, and mobile systems, and we see them, and we need them, and we need cryptography in actual systems. So thank you very much.
Virtual round of applause. We've got time for people on mute from video to show their round of applause. Thank you very much, Monty. We've got time for a couple of questions. So if someone
I would have one.
Okay, whilst Carsten asks his, type yours quickly into the Q&A. Otherwise, so Carsten, go.
Yeah, Monty, I wanted to know, so you compare with this HKE that does everything in MPC and garbled circuits, but there's this recent work in the past few years, like this line of works of PSI where the output is secret shared, and you then can do a secure computation on the outputs. I remember there's this work by Chiampi and Orlandi, and I think there's also some work by Benny and maybe some other people where they do this. So maybe these protocols could either be compared to or could be tweaked in a way such that they could be comparable to what you're doing. Or are you considering this, and maybe they're only semi-honest or so?
No, you're right. We we have to compare them, but I think they are one-sided malicious. That is there, and I mean we probably should compare. We compare to some other thing, and sure, and I'm sure we'll continue to compare. We compare to.
As I said, it might be.
Rindal and Rosulek, malicious secure private set intersection via dual execution. That was 2017. The very recent one, I don't think we compared, just because we essentially we did the work before, but or concurrently. But you know, there are new interns coming every summer, and we are going to continue to prove it, and in the process of improving, we are going to compare, and it's a fair. It's a fair question.
They might also.
Carsten.
I'm out. Okay.
You've already had two. You can have more, right? I'm going to be very strict with you. Right. We've got time for one very quick question, which is a really interesting question from Thomas, who asks, are you planning to deploy this in Google, or has it already been deployed?
Has this been deployed?
Yeah. Or is it being deployed? Is it going to be deployed?
I represent myself in this talk to the largest extreme.
Okay.
It's a tool that is available, programmed and implemented, and it works on Google infrastructure. And when Google decide to say more, they will.
Okay, so Google hasn't decided to say more. That's fine. Sorry for the others who want to ask questions. We've got to move on. Thank you very much, Monty. That was a really, really cool talk. Thank you.
Thank you.
And the, wait a minute, hold on. Right, so the next speaker is going to be, oh God, I'm spitting one. Antigone, can you share your screen? Just check everything works.
Yes, just a second.
Perfecto. Let's just check you've got slides. You can read all your emails.
Let's see.
Present. Just check you can go from one slide to the other. Yeah, brilliant. Okay, so we're now going to hear about JP Match, which is a nice play on JPM. So over to you, Antigone, about stock trading. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Nigel. So I'm going to talk actually about privacy preserving auctions. And this is actually joint work with Tucker, Manuela, Ben, Hans, Gabriele, and Richard. So as you know, I joined JP Morgan 1.5 years ago. I keep doing my research, but actually what is nice, we found some applications in the real world, and I have these amazing new collaborators to like help push this through. And I'm gonna present you with the problem of axe matching. Okay, so axe matching is a term which is used internally in JP Morgan. And this is a service that is provided from different banks, not only from JP Morgan. So I'm gonna jump directly to the problem and tell you what's the current state of this axe matching. And then I'm gonna tell you what are some issues with the current process and how we can solve them using actually secure multi-part computation. And please feel free to stop me whenever you want if you don't understand anything, okay? So today what's happening, so we have in the bank our inventory, and what happens, so every day we send a list of our inventory to particular clients. It's usually actually 60 to 80 clients, okay? We send this daily, usually through email. Then the clients look at this list, and if there's something that they're interested in, they come back to JP Morgan, and we're trying actually to match these trades and execute the trades, okay? Here is an example of what is this axe list. So it's the usual thing. So you have like a symbol, like the stock, and then the side, if you want to buy or sell, or long or short, is the same thing. And then how many shares you want to get from this particular stock, okay? And here is a current issue. So this is JP Morgan's inventory, okay? And how we created this inventory. So let's say yesterday, we executed some trades with our clients. So now our inventory changed, okay? So basically, if you think about it, this inventory includes inventory that we have from the interaction with the clients, okay? So let's say that we did something with a client yesterday, today it might be reflected in the inventory. However, some clients that they are big players of some stocks, let's say they hold most of the stock, there is some concerns, oh, I don't know what's that, sorry. There is some concerns that the inventory reveals their trading activity that they did with us, okay? And this is not desirable. And even some clients ask to have their positions removed from this axe list. And this, what this means is that now our inventory is reduced, so we have something that we cannot offer, okay? And this can have like some consequences in the P&L, which is actually profit and losses, okay? So this is the issue that we start with. Okay, do you have any question about the problem? Everything clear? Okay, I assume yes. So we are going to solve this problem based on like I split them in 4 different categories. Okay, so, and we're going to use techniques from differential privacy and multi-part computation. Okay, so here, this is the names that we give them. And I'm gonna go over them one by one. I will focus more on the auction part, which is actually the 2-part inventory matching and the multi-part inventory matching. And actually, these applications are going to production. The first one is going to production actually this month, and the other ones at the end of this year. So I'm going to tell you more details about that. So let me start quickly about the differential private inventory obfuscation. So this is just to enhance the current process. Okay, so I told you what's the process. We are sending them a list today. They look at the list, they come back to us and tell us what they want to do. And as I said, some clients raise concerns about having their positions in their list. Okay, and for that, we're going actually to use differential privacy to obfuscate this list. And this is to improve the current process. And then we have these enhancements on how we can also actually ask also the clients to send us what orders they want to have and then try to match. So I will go over them and I will define the problems clearly. So in the first one, as I said, so what we're going to do, we're going to use differential privacy to actually mask our X list, add noise. But we want to add noise based on a measurement, based on some measure, right? And the measure here is this P&L, because we don't want to actually add too much noise. And let's say a client wants to buy some stock, and we saw, because we added noise, that we have a lot of this stock, okay? And then the client wants to buy that, and then when he comes back to us, we say, oh, actually, we don't have it. Actually, we need to go and find it. So we don't want to get a lot of risk. So we want to add as much noise as possible to hide the client positions, and at the same time, preserve the P&L. And what will be the goal out of this process? So basically, whether the client positions will be in this X list or they are not, then we shouldn't leak any information about this individual client. And the client better keep his positions inside the inventory. Okay, so here is the problem. So we have the two inventories. Okay, so let's say this is like the first list with all the positions of all the clients. This is the second list with, again, all the positions of the clients. But let's say in the second one, we are removing the second client, okay? And here the problem is when, as I said before, a client holds a large position of this particular stock. So let's say client 2, let's say that was the Apple stock, and the client was having like most of the shares of the Apple stock, okay? So now what we want to say is that looking at these two lists, so whether the client's positions are included in the list or not should be statistically indistinguishable from the other set. Okay, so these two sets should be statistically indistinguishable. And I want to say here what we are hiding. Okay, so here we are hiding the changes in the client's positions from day to day. For example, let's say if yesterday he was going long, okay, he wanted to buy a stock, okay, and if today he's going short, okay, we don't want to actually reveal what he's doing every day. So let's say yesterday he was going long, today he's going short, then we don't want to reveal that today he's going short, okay? We are trying to hide the direction of the changes, okay? And you all know what's differential privacy. Super quick, I'm going to define it here. So we say that the mechanism is epsilon differential private if we have like two neighboring sets, X and Y, differing in one element. So here it will be in the data of a single client. Then the probability that some bad event happens when we are working with the dataset X is almost the same as when we're working with the dataset Y, up to this factor epsilon. And if I rewrite this, so the smaller the epsilon, the closer the probability, so we have more privacy, okay? And the bigger the epsilon, we are more accurate but less private. So everything depends on this parameter epsilon. Okay, and there's this trade-off between the epsilon, and in our application will be the P&L, okay? So as I said, we cannot add too much noise and have like a negative P&L. And with differential privacies, we know we are not hiding all the information about the data set. We are hiding only particular information, okay? For example, here we're hiding the nationality of the guy that is talking. In our case, what we're going to hide is whether one client's positions are in the inventory list or not, okay? This is what we're trying to hide. We're not trying to hide generic information about the inventory. When we do the auctions, we will actually hide completely everything. I will come to that. Okay, so as I said, we need to find the right trade-off between the epsilon and the privacy. the epsilon and the PNL. Okay, and here is the challenge that we have. So this is not a static data set, okay? So as I said, we are publishing this inventory every day. So it's not that we have the data set, we add the noise, and then we are done, okay? So the adversary can look at the data set every day. So we need differential privacy under continual observation. So that was the technical challenge of this work. And there are actually some works in the past from Dwork et al. And Chan et al. Where they did differential privacy under continual observation, but they did it like for simpler functions. It was actually a count function where actually you have streaming data that they are 0 and 1, and you want to count actually how many zeros and ones you have. So they did it for this type of functionalities. Here we had another functionality, right? So here we need to actually publish from day to day how the X changes. So we had actually we are based on their work, and we had actually to introduce some new ideas to make it work for our functionality. So if you're interested in that, contact me and I will let you know about the algorithm, and it will also be public. So I'm not going to talk about this algorithm. I will focus more on the secure multi-part computation, but I'm going to show you actually the results on when we run actually our new algorithm on real data set, historical real data sets for different values of epsilon. Okay, so here, what are these histograms? So first of all, we have actually in the first row, we have what's happening in 1 day. Second is 7-day lag. So when we keep publishing the data set for 7 days, and then the last row is for 14 days. Okay, so in the first one, so this is a histogram of the stocks. Okay, so here you can see how many stocks, and here we're defining what we call leakage probability. So what is this leakage probability? I told you before that we want to hide whether a client is going long or short, the changes in his positions, okay? So this leakage probability is actually half if we are not sure how he changes the direction, okay? If it is more than 0.5, then we can actually guess correctly how he changed his direction. And if it's less than 0.5, actually we are guessing incorrectly. So the closer that we are to 0.5, the better. So in the first column, we have actually our differential private obfuscation with the client positions inside. And in the second column, we still have, again, obfuscation, but without these particular client positions. And here we're comparing what is the difference, okay? And this is for 0.9. Okay, and as you can imagine, like the bigger the epsilon, actually the less privacy we have. So now for 0.5, you see that these probabilities are coming closer. And for example, for 0.1, you see that they're almost very close to each other. So what this tells us, so whether the client has the positions inside our inventory list or not, then the probabilities are the same. So you see here that the client better keep his positions inside, okay? So that was a quick introduction to what we are doing actually now. And this is what is going to go live in production this month. And this is to enhance the current process, okay? So now when we move to the auctions, actually, sorry, I had some examples to show you here how the differential privacy looks like. Sorry, let me go over it quickly. So here you can see that the blue one is actually, this is for a particular stock. The blue one is actually how much we have based on data for 1 year. This is the true value of the inventory. Then the green one is the client positions. Remember that I told you that the client holds a lot of positions in this particular stock. That's why it's actually very close to the blue one. And the orange one is basically what we are going to publish. Okay, so that's an example to show you how it looks like. Okay, and here I have some graphs showing that the P&L does not change. So here we have actually, again, it's a histogram of the number of stocks. And here is how much money we are losing or gaining for these particular stocks. So here is the difference between the P&L when we do the obfuscation and when actually we don't do the obfuscation and we exclude the client. And here is actually when we do the obfuscation, including the client, and the obfuscation when we exclude the client. So you see that the PNL in these two cases is very similar. So we are able to achieve the same PNL as we do today, where we're not hiding the client positions, and at the same time actually hide the client positions if we include them. Okay, so now let's go to what I was saying before. So the first application was to improve the current process. And when we want to do the secure auctions, we cannot change the current process. We cannot jump from one to the other immediately, right? Because as I said, also other banks are doing this. So if we stop sending our inventory, the clients will go to the other banks and get the inventory from there, okay? So we had to think how we can do these particular auctions here. And in fact, you know, they're not building anything if you do not get the feedback from the clients before you start building anything. So I had the chance to actually go and meet the clients and see what are their needs and what they would like to see. And we got feedback from 20 clients. So whatever I'm going to say here and the setting, the MPC setting that I'm going to define is based on the feedback that we got from these clients. Okay, so let's move to the two-party case. So the problem is the same, okay? We have the JP Morgan sending the inventory. So another issue that I did not mention, which actually you can guess, is that from this process, also JP Morgan is revealing its own inventory, okay? So we are also revealing our inventory. And moreover, there are some regulations and firm restrictions that does not let JP Morgan reveal or include in this inventory our full inventory, okay? It's some filter inventory. We cannot put our exact inventory today when we send the list out, okay? So first we had the problem that the clients were complaining that their trading activity is being revealed. Then we are revealing the inventory of JP Morgan, and moreover, we are revealing the inventory, but we cannot actually make available our whole inventory because it's filtered. Okay, so what we can do, as you can guess, so let's do two-party computation. So instead of sending the DAX list to the client, we're actually going to have JP Morgan and the client run a two-party computation, okay? Here, there's a change in the process, okay? So the client now is asked to send what he wants to do encrypted, okay? In the previous process that I told you, the one that we're using currently, client does not send anything. He just receives from JP Morgan, and then he thinks of what he can actually do. Okay, so there's a change in the process here. That's why client feedback is important. Okay, and the solution is, okay, let's use two-party computation and have the client submit his list in some encrypted way. And then what's the benefit? So we can actually offer the full inventory of JP Morgan and have like more specialized matches, okay? So this is the two-party case. And actually the two-party case, it was very easy to instantiate, easy in the following sense. So if you think about it, okay, so we have the two parties. Let's focus on one symbol, okay? So what do you need to compute? You basically need to compute the mean of the two values, okay? The two quantities. And I have to say that it's not, we can also accommodate partial matches, okay? So if JP Morgan has 10 shares of Apple and the client wants 5, we'll give him 5. It doesn't have to be like an exact match. Okay, and this is why we need to do a comparison. So to do that, we are using the malicious garbling of Wang et al. And so when the client wants to do transactions with JP Morgan, he comes and then we just invoke the two-party garbling. And then at the end, we're finding out what are the matches, okay? And I can give you some benchmarks. So this is actually fast. So we can do, I lost the benchmark. Oh yeah, for 256 symbols in one garble circuit, actually it can take 0.49 seconds, okay? So this is like a solution that we have for the two-party matching. Okay, let's move to the multi-party X matching now. So here, what is the new property that we are adding? So what I said so far, so okay, so now with the two-party case, we can hide JP Morgan's inventory. We can offer the full inventory. Then we don't have the clients raising these concerns that trading activity is being revealed. And also now what we can do, let's try to see if we can match clients together. So let's say a client asks for something that we don't have, but maybe the other client asks the opposite, okay? So this is what the multi-party is going to do. So we can actually start matching clients and achieve better internalization and offer actually even better rates, okay? So here is actually our requirements for the problem. So, and this is based on the feedback we've got from the clients and of course from JP Morgan. Okay, so we should not have communication between the clients no matter what. Okay? So the topology should be a star network. Then the clients, so these auctions that I told you, they're actually non-continuous auctions. There's this dark pool that is continuous, but the ones that I'm talking about now, they're non-continuous, and actually they require that the clients that they want to participate, they will come in the morning, some fixed time. They will commit to whatever they want to trade, and then the matching will start. Okay, so all the clients must commit to what they want to do, all of them until, let's say, 8 a.m. Okay, and this is actually a restriction, and you will see why. Like, they need to commit, and then in secure computation, actually, we need to make sure that they're using the same input that they use when they committed. So it creates some issues. Also, we want to support partial matches, and the client computation should be actually minimal. We should not use the client to do all the matches, okay? So if we have like, I don't know, 100 clients, we should not use the computation of all the clients to do all these matches. Then we really need malicious security. We cannot go with covert security or semi-honest. Like if you go to covert, you don't want to start disputes with banks. And then we also want to have a fair solution. For example, you want to say like first come, first served for the clients, whoever like places the order first till 8 a.m. So it must be some ranking. Or you can use some other model, okay? So you should not have some preference over some clients. So this is the model that we have, and we had to devise a solution for this particular model. Okay, and actually we do have the solution, and this is the application that will go in production at the end of this year. And actually I have to mention here, actually Nigel had the work that they did this kind of auction. They call it volume matching. It's the same thing here. We're trying to match the quantities. The price is fixed, okay? However, their topology was not a star network. They had like more servers in the middle, okay? So this does not accommodate our needs here. So let me show you the semi-honest version, but I will only present the idea, and then I'll tell you what are the challenges for malicious. So here is a semi-honest greedy approach.
We've got about a minute.
Oh, but I started a bit.
Yeah, okay. We'll give you 2 or 3 minutes, but just give you an idea, okay?
Okay, good. Okay, so I'm going to show you the semi-honest greedy approach. So let's say we have 3 clients and we want to match them together, okay? So the first one wants to buy Apple, the other 2 want to actually sell, and we can actually give 75% for the long and 100 for the short. So the first step is that the client somehow encrypt the orders, they send them to JP Morgan, and we do a secure aggregation, okay? And then we know how much short and how much long we have to offer. Okay, and then what we do, we go to every client one by one, let's say first come, first served, and we see how much we have available, and we compute actually a secure mean to find out how much we can match, okay? So the first one we can do like 120, the second 50, and the fourth 70, okay? And now, the first proof of concept that we have, actually it was also with Gilad, who was in JP Morgan, how we did it. So for the secure aggregation, we used the Diffie-Hellman exchange to do that. And then for the mean, we again used garbling. So there are multiple issues here to make it maliciously secure, because you have these 2 phases and you need to make sure that the parties are using the same input in both phases, okay? So you can do it, but it will be very expensive. And another thing that you can do, so let's use the secure garbling that we showed before, and let's make the simple thing. Parties commit to their inputs before the process starts, and I told you this is a requirement. And then we start running 2-party mean between the clients, okay? But if we start doing that, we need to make sure that the parties use the same input in the garbling, okay? That means that we need actually to have a check inside the garbling that takes the commitment. And this is not ideal, okay? Garbled circuits are good for Boolean, so this will not be very efficient. Okay, and very quickly here, I'm gonna tell you how we are doing that. So basically, we're trying to find a more efficient solution. And this efficient solution, we're going to use actually secret sharing. And what we're going to do, the parties actually will commit to their inputs at the beginning of the protocol. And here they will commit to shares. And when I say here 3-party, I don't really mean all the parties have the same roles. 3 parties that only the 2 parties have inputs. Okay, the 2 parties that we want to match. And JP Morgan is the 3rd client. Okay, JP Morgan does not have an input. That's what I call 3-party computation here, just to be specific. Okay, so everybody commits to the shares, and then we're computing 2-party mean for the 2 quantities through the bank. And remember what I told you, the 2 parties should not communicate with each other. Everything should happen through JP Morgan, okay? And here I wanted to show you the semi-honest version. It seems that I don't have time, but I'll tell you that compared to previous works, what we did here, so, and this can be of independent interest, so we were able to have a 3-party comparison protocol where again, the 2 parties only provide input. And we're able to do that without requiring any multiplication. And the protocol is just 1 round, okay? So it seems I don't have time to show you that. Okay, and then as the last thing, I had just pointed to the dark pool. So everything that I showed you here was a non-continuous auction with a fixed price, both the 2-party and the multi-party. So in the dark pool, basically you also have a price, okay? So it's the same problem, but you also have a price. And then what you do, so a new order comes and you're trying to match, for example, this is a cell. So you go, and this is sorted, okay? So you also have things sorted, which is not very computationally efficient. And you're going over the clients and you're trying to find what orders you can match, okay? And we also have a solution actually for the dark pool. And for this one, we are using actually a GPU implementation of an FHE library, and we even optimized it further. And what we can currently do, we can actually do 512 orders in this start topology, okay? We really cannot avoid the start topology. So 512 orders in 11 seconds, okay? And we have a new secure implementation of a priority queue where actually we don't need to go over all the orders to find matches and compare the prices. Okay, so just to conclude, so I showed you this X matching problem that we have in JP Morgan, and we have solutions to raise different concerns that exist with the current process. Okay, and basically here is the summary. So here is that JP Morgan reveals, or its inventory, actually not the full inventory, as I said before. Then we cannot match clients together. We only can match clients to JP Morgan. And what happened? And here, actually, I showed you that we have these auctions where we can actually do not reveal the inventory of JP Morgan, and we can also do this multi-client X matching. And as I said, these things are going to production. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. For your dark pool thing, how many instruments are you dealing? You said you dealt with, I don't know how many orders for a time, but how many instruments is that distributed over?
You mean when you say instruments, you mean?
I mean like stocks.
Yeah, stocks.
Assets, yeah.
Yeah, so that was this 512 orders that I mentioned was for one symbol. So for different symbols, you can parallelize. So the benchmark that I gave you was for one.
So you would have to parallelize across every, so if you had 2,000 symbols, you would need 2,000 instantiations of the protocol in parallel.
Yeah, you can do this in parallel, yeah.
But it would scale, it's basically scales parallel linear with the number of instruments.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Okay. We have some follow-up work we can send you. If you drop me a line where we actually look at real London stock market level dark market throughputs.
Oh, what do you mean real?
I mean, actually, when we modeled the throughput on the basis of there's the Plato auction mechanism, or Plato auction market, which is run by the London stock market. It's the biggest dark market in Europe. So we took their throughputs needed and managed to match those.
Is it like a star topology network, or you use secret sharing for 3 clients?
No, it's where clients are coming in. So, for example, you've got multiple, you've got thousands of traders trading on Plato. So you can't, yeah. So anyway, but we'll send it, if you send me an email, we can send it to you.
Okay, yeah. Cool. I will want to see if if the traders, for example, talk to each other. Yeah.
Yeah, they don't. Yeah, no. Okay, any other questions? Hold on, let me look at the Zulip. Wait a sec, Zulip. No other questions? Okay, let's thank Antigone again. Thank you, brilliant talk. Right, next up is Mads, who's going to talk about putting MPC to use.
Yep, hi.
If it didn't have a use already. Okay, do you want to check you can share your screen?
Let's see if this is going to work.
Okay, can you check that you can go from one to the other, back and forth? Yeah. Okay, so it's up to you, and you've got about 25 minutes. Go.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, and thanks for that introduction. And I'm going to be talking about putting MPC to use. And I've got a slightly different background than most people here. I'm from the HCI community. So my name is Mads Andersen, and I did this work in collaboration with my colleague Laura Lynggaard-Nielsen here at the Alexander Institute. So just a bit of background about why I find this whole area interesting. You know, I started working here around 5 years ago, and you know, like the Alexander Institute, as some of you are probably familiar with, and like I have been working with MPC technology for a long time, but we're not really seeing a large pull from industry to actually like make use of our technology and the framework that we are developing. So at least from my point of view, I've been very interested in trying to look a little bit at, you know, why hasn't MPC had this breakthrough yet? It's existed for more than like 30 years, but we still really have to push this technology. Just to give you a bit of context to the work I'm presenting here, the user studies and the results, they were carried out as part of the Scalable Oblivious Data Analytics project, SODA for short, which was an EU Horizon 2020 project that finished last year. And we collaborate with Philips, Aarhus University, University of Göttingen, and Technical University of Eindhoven. So the focus of the user studies in this project were that, you know, how do we use MPC as a technology for data analytics with an emphasis on like explorative data analytics, like how can we make that work? So how do we apply MPC to real world problems? And the context that we looked in was basically like you have several parties who have different bits of the data, and they all want to find a way to collaborate and get something out of this calculation or several calculations that you want to do in the MPC system. And in the project, we looked at MPC from 2 different human perspectives. One, you know, the project was, I guess I need to say that was carried out as in the health industry. You know, how do we make use of like personal data in the health industry? So we've got the people who contribute their personal data into an MPC system, which I'll refer to as data subjects. And the other perspective is the people who make use of this personal data in some sort of MPC system. It can be like a data analyst who wants to, you know, calculate an average or something like that. And I'll refer to that as an end user. And this talk is going to be like a summary of all the different user studies. We're currently like writing up some of this stuff for HCI conferences. But we basically did this by having 2 subcontractors. We had Lancaster University in the UK and Aarhus University Hospital in Denmark. So we wanted to get this, you know, 2 different perspectives on it from 2 slightly different cultures, even though like both Denmark and the UK have public funded health systems. In terms of data subjects, we looked in Lancaster, we looked at people with dementia plus their carers, because we wanted to get like a group that might have special needs and ideas about data. And at Aarhus University Hospital, we looked at type 1 and type 2 diabetics and pregnant women with diabetes. In terms of the end users, in the UK, we looked at the researchers working with data related to dementia. And in Denmark, we actually interviewed and held workshops with a broad range of analysis from different areas of the health domain, from like research doctors to administrators at hospitals and people from the public sector in at a higher level. So when this application was written up like 4 years ago, there was this idea of well, maybe the thing we need is a better interface. So for the data subjects, this is from the actual application. It was written that the consent control component deployed at the data controllers allows data subjects to control how their information is processed. By presenting the privacy guarantees and options of SODA in an understandable way, this component aims to make data subjects comfortable with their data being processed. In a similar manner with the end users, we wanted to do an iterative prototyping approach based on workshops in which a new user experience and/or tool surrounded data analysis is created based on previous results and is shown and tested with end users. So again, we wanted to create something which would work with these people. And in terms of the end users, like our initial ideas were something like a lot of these data like analysis at the hospitals and statisticians, they tend to work in a tool like SPSS. So we had this initial idea of like, how do we make a plugin for SPSS which allows people to work with data in an MPC system. And we had this initial idea of maybe blurring out some of the fields to make this like give like the perspective that this data was available but was not able to be seen. However, as we started doing our interviews and our workshops, we found out that this lack of tools and this lack of an interface for the data subjects were not really what was preventing like MPC adaptation in the health sector. So what we really got to a point where we realized that there were a number of things we really needed to understand about the nature of data analysis in this sector and how that impacts the applicability of MPC technology. So instead, we actually ended up looking more at like, what are the obstacles in data analytics in the health sector today? And how does that impact MPC being used in this context? And what are the potentials of MPC use in this context? So just to sum up the key results that we found that, this is not just MPC, but in general in like the whole big data community, that tends to be this idea that data is just something that's out there. But we realized that through our studies that data is not just data. We also found that this black box nature of MPC can be a benefit in some cases, but often it's also an obstacle to what people want to do. And we also found that there's still a need to build trust between the participating stakeholders, even though MPC is deployed. So to go into details with these things, well, we found that you can't just tap into data. It's not just, like this hospital has this database and another one in like another region in Denmark or maybe another country has this data, and we just like trust that, we can just pull those things together and just use it. As one participant said, when you worked with laboratory analysis, you know that a number isn't just a number. So we really found that it's actually quite difficult to do this, because the data is often broken. Even though it's often perceived as something objective, raw, and pure, it's created, it's maintained, sometimes missing, sometimes, and a lot of it, like when this data is broken, it's usually being repaired through a social and technical process. So just examples from our interviews here. We had one doctor who talked about the blood glucose level. Was it measured in the home or at the clinic? What was the person doing while it was taken? Where were the results logged? Was it manually or automatically? And all these things had a lot of impact on whether or not he actually felt comfortable using the data. Another doctor mentioned, well, men carry their phones in their pocket, women keep them in their bags. since EPJ, which is the Electronic Patient Journal in Denmark. Since that was implemented, one guy said there's been a decline in heart failures. So, and you know, of course, he didn't believe that was just because everything got better, but there was some sort of thing that happened in the digitalization that they couldn't really explain. And in terms of diabetes, when they do classifications of diabetics, they know that 15% of the overall classifications, like type 1 or type 2, are wrong. And if you go into more details, there's a lot of like subcodes there, like 70% of the diagnosis codes are incorrect. So you really need to know this about the data. And another fun example is that the company that we talked to, in one of the systems that they interacted with, they found out that, well, when children turn 2, all of a sudden they weigh 14 tons. And that was, of course, because, you know, as soon as they turned 2, they went from like measuring grams to kilograms. But without that knowledge, and if you just got the raw data, that this actually, the unit actually also changed, you might get into trouble here. So what we found is that data analytics is often a lot of hidden work. So there's really a lot of need for a better like data format standards, because there's a lot of time being used in cleaning and moving data around. And this is one of the things where they really saw the benefits of having a system where you didn't have to like move it around all the time. And we also found that there's a really big need for metadata. Like you really need to know how the data was collected, what quality it is, and all these things surrounding the data before you're actually able to use it. We found that there are some potential usages of MPC here, that instead of like of thinking about like this, like, you know, inspecting the data visually, which is how the people we talk to would normally work, and which would be an obstacle into not using MPC in their work. They found, we talked to them about like maybe having some sort of idea of using MPC to actually calculate some metadata about the data instead of giving access to the data. We also talked to some researchers who actually, to be able to publish their results, needed to publish a data set. And in that sense, it's not really, you would think that it might not be useful to like use MPC at all, but they did find that, you know, a lot of the hidden work for them is to write like different applications to acquire data. So if they could get some sort of preliminary result in, you know, whether or not their theory was right or wrong, they could kind of get, you know, assess whether or not it would be worth spending the time to actually apply for getting the data. But what we really found was that you really need to look at working with data in a different way if you want to, you know, deploy MPC in something like this, because a lot of it is explorative, and then all the problems with like data leakage if you don't control how many queries and what kind of queries you run after each other. There's also a concept of trust that we got some insight to in doing these studies, because MPC is often to people a lot like me who's not a cryptographer explained as this, you know, like we use MPC because we want to eliminate the need for this trusted third party. And this text is taken from one of the companies working with MPC, which says MPC provides cryptographic services without any reliance on sharing secrets with anyone, including a trusted third party, which is subject to compromise. And of course, this is all true, but there's still a need for trust, and you really need to think about like how we communicate about trust in something like this. Because, you know, if somebody sets, and this is something we found in the workshops with data subjects here, is that, you know, they instantly started, when we presented like an idea of an MPC system that you know, took data from sources that made sense to them with and this was diabetics in this sense. We found that they really didn't ask much about what the technology did and how the technology met all these guarantees, but they started talking a lot about, but who is like running the system? Where is it, like, are you running the system? Is the insurance company running the system? Who's actually running it? And in the sense of running it in MPC, of course, it's different places, but at some point, somebody sat down and implemented the system, and they really wanted to know who's accountable for the guarantees that we presented to them. And in that sense, there's actually some sort of trusted party. For example, if we were at the Alexander Institute were to deploy an MPC system, well, you know, and we would have parties that we would trust wouldn't collude. Well, we still would have to implement the system, so there still need to be put quite a lot of trust in us. And of course, it's not trusting us with the same thing as the data, but there's still a lot of trust in being put into us. Because in crypto, there's a lot of trust in the correctness of a mathematical like proof. Like different protocols ensure that it can be guaranteed that, you know, you can't break the protocol as long as a specified amount of participants do not conspire. And of course, there's different scenarios like malicious and semi-honest, and so there's different things there. But those are really difficult for like normal people to understand. So we found that, you know, trust in like a like in an honest majority setup indicates that you don't really need to trust the other parties, but you still need to trust that they provide good data. But as it's often presented in literature, like if you don't trust that these corrupt parties follow the protocol and will try to get like the input data out, like how can you trust that they won't try to corrupt the output by providing like bad data? Because Giddens wrote that trust is confidence in or reliance on some quality or attribute of a person or thing, or the truth of a statement. So again, you put a lot of trust into personal things here. So we found that, you know, again, as I said before, the participants weren't really that interested in, you know, like how MPC worked and what it could, you know, guarantee. They just wanted somebody to say, this is anonymous and we guarantee it. And then we had a discussion with some participants about, you know, what how would that look for you? Who would you trust in this? Would you trust us? Would you trust, you know, the hospital, the insurance company? And through like a strange discussion, we actually ended up with, they could all agree on the EU, which is probably not representative at all, but at least, you know, they really wanted to put the trust in some sort of institution rather than the fact that we did our job correctly, or that a mathematician, you know, proved something. So related to what I said before, like, I really want my competitors to benefit from my investment in training this model, or do I want to, you know, get the benefit of them reacting on the output, which I have corrupted by, you know, corrupting my input, and then not reacting to it myself? You know, you have to trust that the other people, like the other participants, don't do something like that. And then again, there's also people who like subconsciously type in wrong numbers, you know, like they don't really think about it. They make mistakes. You have to trust that they don't do this. We also found that a lot of the data analysts put a lot of trust in looking at the data, like visually inspecting the data and trying to get ideas of, you know, what they could actually do with it. And when we started talking about, you know, like, oh, would you benefit from getting like data from another country? There's a lot of like distrust in the you know, that other countries would necessarily live up to the same standards as you did yourself. And they were really worried about this black box property of not being able to actually inspect the data from another country. So there is really a need to inspect the quality of the other parties, at least in this explorative medical sense, or that we looked into. We also came upon this interesting thing, and it showed up at several workshops independent of each other, both in Denmark and in the UK, where, you know, we present this technology as, you know, we can eliminate the need to trust these other parties. And we actually found that introduced the fact that we started talking about that you didn't have to trust other institutions, introduced a lot of distrust at the participants. So like people said something like, why should we distrust the NHS, like the health system in the UK? We also like had somebody say, not even the craziest lawyer would take it to this level, you know, like needing the guarantees that we could do with implementing an MCC system. And also somebody who said, we don't have any clients who require this level of security. So introducing distrust can really have some consequences on trust, and it can sound a little bit counterintuitive, but this is really how people deal with trust. So that kind of brings me to the end of my talk, and I just want to sum up with the key results here. And I can say that what we're really trying to work with at the moment is to try to create like a model and a language to talk about like the properties of MPC between different groups, for like between cryptographers and like people who work as data analysts and just people who need to understand the system in general, because especially a word like trust is being understood very differently in different communities, and that can have an impact on how you talk about these things. So I'm currently really interested at your perspectives on all of this, and I'd really like if any of you would like to participate in an interview. It can be done like remotely, and we've engaged a lot of different stakeholders so far, but we haven't talked to like the MPC experts, and they last around half an hour. And if you're interested, please either in participating or just want to know more about the work that we've done. Please send me an email on my email address is here, and I'll post it on the chat thing afterwards. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, do we have any questions? Let's have a look. Q&A. No? Well, you can get back. So if you post on the chat, we can do with your thingy. So let's thank all of the speakers again for today, from the first session of today. We return in 5 minutes with 2 other talks in which Carsten will take over as your chair. But in the meantime, I promised a few more commercial breaks. So whilst we're having a 5-minute break, I will start playing you some weird security videos that I've seen on the interweb over the last few days. Okay, so here's the first.
As I walk through the airport and I'm trying to connect, I take a look at my signal and realize nothing's left with an hour to kill. That won't work for me, but then I see a sign that says that the Wi-Fi is free. I ain't never crossed a network that I can't connect with. I just asked for the password and I'm on in a second. Facebook and Twitter and shop on Amazon. I enter the same password each time that I log on. As I'm out here playing in the cyber traffic, other hackers sniffing my unencrypted packets. I open up my bank app and go to log in. I got no money left. Should have used a VPN. We're spending most of our lives living in the hackers' paradise. We're spending most of our lives living in the hackers' paradise. Look at the situation that I be facing. Can't live a normal life with the bad guys are chasing. They send me messages, fish after fish, too many fake emails, and they got me in anguish. I'm a cyber savvy fool with safety in my mind, but sometimes I get fooled to the tricks and I'm blind. You better know where you're browsing and how you're talking, or you and your passwords will be lined and shoved. Getting hacked by the bad is just a click away. So listen to me and do exactly what I say. Think before you click and read and tap delete. And when surfing public Wi-Fi, always be discreet. Tell me why are we so blind?
There we go. Makes it, I bet they don't do that at PKC. Anyway. So now it's over to Carsten, who's somewhere.
You all for joining the invited talk session, and big thanks to Yuval again for giving the invite talk.
Oh, I've just gone to PKC. Whoops.
Let's not draw people away from us.
Yeah, that's not. No. Okay.
So I think we have Carsten down as the next session chair, but he's actually busy at PKC right now. So I guess I can take it.
Yeah, you take it.
No problem. I guess we can get back to being on time for this one. If Tor is around, you can start setting up your slides.
Yeah.
Hey, Tor.
Hey. Just see.
So you got sick of the Danish summer and had to have some snow in your background?
Yeah. One day with warm weather, and now I'm missing some snow.
Very nice.
Okay. So this is actually the first time I'm sharing in Zoom, and I see I need to restart Zoom in order to enable it because of security. So I'll be back in a second.
Security. Always holding us back. Okay, now we see something. That looks good. Are you there, Tor? Can you say something?
There we go. Sorry. It's like too many screens and too many shares.
Yeah, I get that problem.
In the right button. Yeah.
Okay, so next up we have another speaker from the Alexandria Institute, that's Tor Fredriksson, who will talk about HEDAX, the Health Data Exchange. Over to you.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you for the introduction. So this is joint work with my colleagues, Jonas Lindström from the Alexandria Institute, and Benny Pincus from Bailan, and Nikolai Vulgushev from Pleo. And before I start going further on, I just want to give a word of warning that this is very much bleeding edge work in progress. So first, a little bit of shameless advertisement / setting the stage. So I'm from the Alexandria Institute, which, for those of you who don't know it, is basically a non-profit organization in Denmark, whose goal is to bridge the gap between the academic community and the commercial space within computer science. So we have different labs looking at different areas of computer science and try to get this out into something that will actually be used in the real world. And I'm with the security lab, of course. So that's just a bit of setting the stage about who I am and what we are here. So this talk we'll be talking about the Health Data Exchange project. I will just start by describing a little bit exactly what this project thing actually is, and then a bit more about what this talk would be about, like from the more cryptographic point of view. where we'll give a few protocols and for solving a project problem in relation to this this project. And then I will give some concluding remarks and further points that needs to be addressed to fully obey this overall project. So let's address the elephant in the room. What exactly is this project? So the project description mentions the following, which is a bit long, but basically from it we can extract a few keywords that we basically need to prevent something privacy preserving, confidential, that's scalable for all data with relevance for health in Denmark. Furthermore, this data should, again, privacy preserving and confidentially be usable to compute some functions for several societies, business, research institutions, and so on. So what we gather from this is basically this project considers the real world setting, or in this case now a model, where we have basically a vertically shared database between different organizations containing data on every single citizen in Denmark. So basically it means that we have different governmental institutions, we have health authorities and so on. Each have some data on every citizen in Denmark. And basically what we want to do is we want to combine all this data in such a way that it allows for privacy preserving and confidential queries on this data by businesses, research institutions, and so on. And finally, the last keyword I also want to mention is that this should, of course, be consensual. So every citizen whose data is being used in a computation should be able to give consent to do this, even though the data itself will be used in a privacy preserving manner. So the project itself is a large research project that's sponsored by Innovation Fund Denmark, which is an innovation fund here in Denmark. Surprise, surprise. It's 2 years in length, and it's basically just started, and it will result in a production level solution. So this is something that's actually going to be used in the real world to compute on real data. It sprung out of 2 large research projects. First project was one called Big Data by Security, also here in Denmark, which had the goal to use MPC to do statistics on big data sets, such as credit rate benchmarks or energy consumption benchmark. The other was the research project my colleague Mads just talked about, SODA, the EU Horizon 2020, so pretty typical research and innovation action project, whose focus was on oblivious computation over large data with emphasis on health. So the HEDAX project involves a lot of different partners. Most of those will probably be unfamiliar to most of you. And that's quite interesting because a lot of these partners, as I've tried to color coordinate, is considering medical or data companies, data rights companies, or governmental organizations. So basically most of the people involved in this project are here with the data, with an infrastructure, with database, with consent, and all those things needed to actually deploy things. And the 2 partners here that have expertise in, say, MPC and development is Cicada and the Alexandra Institute, where Cicada is an Aarhus MPC business that is basically actually doing taking MPC and secret sharing into a real world setting. So with all this in mind, basically what this project aims to do is to construct a framework that allows for privacy preserving and consent requiring service to do statistics on a very large confidential health database that is held between different servers. And this will be implemented based on the MPC framework Fresco, which we've developed at the Alexandra Institute, which is implementing speeds and different flavors of speeds. So that in mind about the overall project, let me just tell a bit about where the more interesting MPC challenges are, as I think this is more that's more relevant in this setting than talking about different data providers. So for today, I will consider specific setting for doing this HEDAX project. Basically, we're considering the 2 server settings. So we consider the setting where the database is vertically distributed between 2 servers. Here in this country, where each server contains a row of every citizen in Denmark. But of course, the columns, like the specific types of data, the specific values, will be different between these 2 servers. We want to consider this, the setting where an arbitrary amount of clients basically come in a series or in parallel, whatever, to do some computation on a subset of this Danish population. So just for reference, those who don't know, in Denmark we have about a little more than 5.5 million citizens. So we're talking very big, at least I would say very big databases. For the purpose of this talk, we consider like a bit more of a lenient security goal, such as semi-honest correctness, but malicious privacy. And we're putting a pin in the consent aspects and assume this will be handled out of band instead of the cryptographic solution. So since we basically have a bunch of different clients, we have some servers, we have some citizens. It's not completely trivial how this all works in an MPC setting. So let's consider for a second what we actually want from such a solution. So in regards to privacy, of course, we want to hide the data from one of the big data providers towards the other, and from both of them towards the client. We also want that only the client learns the output. We don't want these data provider gaining too much information. In regards to correctness, I mean, we want a typical definition of correctness, but in this case, and in MPC in general, you know, we have the potential issue of input substitution. So basically, what we want in this setting is that at some point in the beginning, before the clients come along, basically the servers commit to the input for all the citizens, and then they can't change it after they see this and this client comes along with this and this query. So this basically means we're in a setting that's really excellent to do some sort of function-independent preprocessing, MPC, which is you know, exactly what we can do with speeds. So if we assume, I'm going to argue why this is not the case, but if we just for the sake of argument assume that these privacy and correctness things I mentioned a second ago are enough, then what could we do? Well, we could say we have an MPC box, and we have 2 databases. We have the 2 servers database with the same indices, one here and one over here. And basically what we then want them to do is just to input the data into an MPC computation, and then at some point a client comes along and has a request for a function to be computed, and a subset of indices this function should be computed on. So you can give this to the servers, and they can simply run this in MPC as public information. At the end, the result will come back to these servers, which they will pass on to the client. And to avoid the servers from actually learning the result, we can use outsourced NPC, which has been worked on a few years ago, where there are some standard approaches, such as this one by Damgaard et al. So this seems pretty great because we get the privacy we wanted, we get the correctness we wanted within this setting. But when we think about it a bit more and how this is actually applied, it's not enough. The reason being that now these 2 servers, they learn whatever indices every client wants to compute on. And even though this can just be considered meta information, as we get told time and time again, is also still information. In particular, in a setting like this, even if these identifiers are pseudonymized, a specific person like me could be, or you could be involved in many different computations. Thus, first of all, allowing to find your identity. Second, finding a lot of information about you might not want to share. So this could be, for example, if we have a person who has been to an STD clinic, who's a member who's going to as a customer at a certain sex shop and has a kindergarten in Nørrebro in Copenhagen, then it might be possible with this knowledge of all these different clients computing on this specific person. So first of all, find out who that is, and then make some interesting connections based on who these clients are, or who these companies are he has been to. Of course, as I mentioned, this is all going to be based on consent, so he might not consent to being part of the computations of the STD clinic or this sexual way as a customer, but he's fine with being part of the computation for the kindergarten where his kid go. But this just even further proves that it's quite essential to be able to use this in a usable setting, that we need to actually hide not just identifier, but even pseudo identifiers of the people that would be computed on. So how are we going to do that? There's different approaches we can think of. I mean, like the boilerplate one would basically just be to now say that we run a three-party MPC computation with the client every time a new client comes along. It's pretty straightforward. We just use our MPC box. Done. The problem is this requires the client to do MPC, which we normally would say, yes, of course it does. That's not a problem. We know how to do MPC. But what we actually want to do here is a real service, a real applicable service for companies or researchers that might not be MPC people. So this is basically means we want to apply this in sort of a web service setting. So, and running MPC in JavaScript is really not something I want to do. And I think very few people would desire to do that. Secondly, we have the issue that even if we do this, if we want to hide the indices, now we have the problem of needing to obliviously access the right elements in these huge databases with millions and millions of rows. And it's going to take a long time in MPC. We could fix the problem of the client doing MPC by using the approach I previously mentioned of outsourced MPC. It's easy to implement. It's efficient for the client, but again, we have the issue of oblivious access of a huge database. So this is why we are coming up with a new solution to fix this and allow obliviously accessing data in a big database. So as a stepping stone, we will consider this following protocol. So basically, let's just focus on one server at this point in time. So we focus on this one. What the server does is it picks a random seed for a PRF, and it picks a random permutation, permuting all the entries in the database. And then what it does is it uses the PRF and the index of each element in the database to compute a one-time pad the data, then use the permutation to permute it. And it sends this permuted database to the other server, and it sends the seed and the permutation to the client that comes along. The client can then use the indices in the set it wishes to query to compute the padding, and it can then use the permutation to compute the permuted indices. It can then send the permuted indices to the other server, use outsourced MPC to give us input its padding. Then the two servers can run MPC using the public function, and this other server here will basically just input only the indices that was given by this client into the MPC computation. And the actual data is hidden towards this server because it's padded and permuted, and since it's permuted, knowing these permuted indices doesn't leak anything. Then it can be unpadded in MPC. And finally, to get the data from this one, we just do the same, and then return the output as a outsourced using the outsourced MPC approach. So as a stepping stone, we actually implemented this approach as part of the Soda project with a nice little web interface, as you can see here, where you basically just plug in a CSV file of indices of people. This is a simulated database of a couple of million entries, and the CSV file I think is about 100 entries. Then you pick a function. Up here you can see it's computing a correlation of 2 different columns on these indices. Then this is done on the server, and the result is coming back being presented in the web client. You can also compute a linear regression based on some indices. And similarly, the result will be computed on the server and returned to the client once it's done. Okay, so that's all nice and good. We keep simple symmetric computations outside of the MPC. There's low communication and computation, and it's basically only dependent on the amount of queries the client wishes to access. So we can step out of this whole problem with the big database. The problem is this is only semi-honestly secure, and in fact, it's very semi-honestly secure in the sense that the client now basically has some toxic waste. It has the seed for the PRF and it has the permutation, which means if it sends that to the other server, we basically break all the privacy of the first server's database. Secondly, with this approach, we must execute a padding and permutation of the database for every new client that comes along. And we want to run this as an online service, and this is actually going to be a huge overhead. So this has some issues. Fortunately, they're relatively easy to fix. So first, to remove the issue of the permutation, sharing the permutation with the client, we can use private information retrieval instead. And to remove the PRF seed, we can use a lightweight symmetric encryption in MPC instead. This again only yields us a semi-honest, although now private in case of malicious attacks. And thus we can, in that case, we can then use pretty standard transformations and checks such as max and linear combinations to ensure we can get malicious security. So what the protocol now looks like is that the first server encrypts, picks a random key, encrypts all every row of the database using this key, using a MPC lightweight cipher. It's a cipher that can be run efficiently in MPC, such as MIMC. And then it sends this encrypted database to the other party. So now both this server and this server can input the encrypted database into private information, the private information retrieval protocol, and the client can input the indices it wishes to learn and then learn the result. So basically, just a quick word for those who are not super familiar with private information retrieval. It's basically a protocol that, as the name suggests, allow someone to privately retrieve some information, meaning that you have some server or multiple servers holding some data you want to access. You don't want them to know what you access. So the data itself is not secret. So this also means that this might leak a lot of information on other data points that you don't want to access. This can be done both with a single server or multiple servers. If we have multiple servers, it can be done quite efficiently with information theoretic primitives. So in a case like this, it can be based on XOR and will result in sublinear communication. That's why we want to use this. I mean, the trivial solution would be to just send the whole thing to the client, but we don't really want that. Like before, this is just focused on doing it for one of the servers. So we switch the roles, do it for the other servers. The other server. And then at the end, the client can publish the function it wished to compute and give the encrypted input to the MPC computation using outsourced MPC. And the computation can then decrypt it, and they can run the computation and return it to the client in an outsourced manner. So what's still missing? I mentioned that this is still only like semi-honest. It's possible to make this go incorrectly. So you need some checks on top of that. And as I mentioned, we wanted to do this with a consent mechanism. This is going to be a bit more complex, but we have an idea of how to achieve this based on digital signatures using randomizable public keys to allow basically to allow citizens to sign that they give their consent, and then have the servers verify this, but in a way where the keys get randomized in such a way that it can be verified outside of MPC, but without leaking which specific client actually gave consent, also which specific citizen gave consent. So basically, to conclude, based on this approach, we achieve a lot of what we actually want. We get to the setting where we have a setup phase, no matter how many clients we have come by, which the servers execute and is linear in communication and requires linear amount of symmetric encryptions of the data. Then per client, say who accesses M elements, using the private information retrieval approach, this gets down to O of M times square root of N communication. We have some optimizations that we can use in the setting to get it down to O of square root of M times N. It can also be lower, but then you need using some other approaches, but then you have a bit higher amount of computation you need to do. Although there's a new Eurocrypt paper we need to look at that does this even better. We get down to then only requiring for the servers. It still requires some linear computation, not communication, but computation in order to actually do this private information retrieval. Since it must be oblivious to which entry that actually gets retrieved. And we do still now need to, for each element, need to do a symmetric, although we can use a lightweight cipher computation in MPC. For the client, it's still pretty lightweight what it actually needs to do. It doesn't need to do any heavy MPC stuff. And the communication gets down also for the client to O of the square root of M times N. But again, as I mentioned, this is a work in progress, so the numbers might change. But anyway, to conclude, what I've tried to present here and what we also want to achieve in this HEDAX project is basically a real-world setting, real-world framework for allowing to do privacy preserving, basically MPC as a service on very big aggregate data. So the goal here is to hide access patterns on a large database and allow to do computation. Then eventually also allow this to integrate with consent from the data subjects. And yes, that's basically it for what I wanted to say for now.
Thanks very much for the nice talk, Tom.
Thank you.
So I don't see any questions on the Q&A right now. Write them out now if you have any. Nothing's coming up. I was just wondering about the application that they have in mind. Is this to do queries on like a medical database that already exists based on people?
Yeah, so there's already a lot of data collected. This is not a database that's going to be constructed. Like concretely, we want to use some data from Statistics Denmark and the Health Data Authority. It already has a lot of data collected on all the systems.
Mm-hmm. So given that there's already essentially, I guess, one party who owns the data, then splitting up into 2 extra servers is not adding any additional assumption about non-collusion.
Sorry, hold on. There's a bunch of sequels. Could you ask that again? You say, I mean, it's not exactly like one party that owns all the data. Like one of the servers will be run by one of the like the Statistics Denmark, and the other will be run by the Health Data Ministry, who each have distinct data. Even though both of those are here in Denmark governmental institutions, there's very strict rules about data sharing. Like different governmental institutions do not have access to each other's data.
Yeah.
And some of this might also, come from non-governmental.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. So one quick question from Christian on the chat, which is any legal analysis done already?
No. So the project is just starting. So like this specific thing, there's not a legal analysis on, but there was a legal analysis as part of the SODA project. Although like not specifically of this case, but if it's more of a general, in general, there's a lot of legal analysis happening on MPC and especially computation on shared data. So it is actually something the lawyers are getting involved with.
Mm-hmm. But if this is something that people might actually end up using, isn't there a requirement to do an analysis specifically for this case?
Yeah, of course. But as I mentioned, like the project itself, as I mentioned, it was based on some other projects, and this project itself is just starting now.
Yeah. But it's in the roadmap.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So thanks, Tor, again. Now let's try and move on to the next speaker. So if you can stop sharing your slides. Yep. And Hyung Hoon, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Great. Okay, that looks good.
Okay,
so
great.
this talk is by Hyung Hoon Cho, who will be talking about an application of multi-party computation to biomedical data sharing. Off you go.
All right. Hi, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here virtually. First off, I want to thank the organizers for this opportunity to speak. For those of you who don't know, Broad Institute is a genomics and biomedical research center at MIT and Harvard, where I started last year as a fellow to start a new group focusing on solving biomedical data privacy problems. So in recent years, there's been an explosion of large-scale biomedical data sets around the globe, thanks to rapid advances in high-throughput experimental technologies. These data sets are often scattered across isolated silos, as the previous speaker has mentioned, in different labs, companies, and biobanks. And these are often difficult to access for research due to regulations and policies related to data privacy concerns. So the goal of our work is to leverage tools from modern cryptography, in particular multi-party computation, which is what I'll focus on in this talk, to overcome this barrier and enable secure sharing of these biomedical data. And the hope is that by doing so, we'll be able to enable new scientific discoveries with access to data whose scale far exceeds what individual entities can achieve. So in this talk, I will tell you about two of my recent papers on using MPC for data sharing pipelines in biomedical research. And these will cover two different domains, population genetics and pharmacological machine learning. And as I will explain, both of these directions pose unique challenges that we overcome with new computational techniques. So let me first start with the genetics example. So many of you have probably seen a figure like this in a different context before. So it's showing that the number of sequenced human genomes has been increasing at an exponential rate in the past couple of decades. Now we're at around 500,000 genomes. And this is projected to reach more than 10 million genomes in the next few years. So this is great news in that now we have a lot of genetic sequences out there that we could leverage to gain a better understanding into human genetics. But the bad news is that a lot of this data lies outside the reach of researchers. So first, as I mentioned, a lot of these data are stored in isolated silos that are difficult to pull together. And even in cases where we do have access to centralized repositories, these are often put under strict and time-consuming access review procedures that slow down the rate of research. So what we envision is a new computational platform where individuals and institutions can contribute their private genomic data to scientific studies in a secure manner with the assurance that their data will remain private throughout the process. So what could we achieve if we had a platform like this? One thing we can do is to look at natural variation in the genome across different individuals. So this includes looking at things like single nucleotide polymorphisms, or SNPs, which refer to single letter differences between different individuals' genomes. And the idea is to collect this information from a large population of individuals to try to understand how these genetic differences lead to differences in different human conditions. And just to define the key vocabulary here, these elements that differ between individuals in the genome are called genetic variants. So SNP is one type of genetic variant. And the set of variants that define one's genome are called genotypes, and the emergent biological properties that come out of this that we may want to study are called phenotypes or traits. So in terms of linking the genotypes to phenotypes for understanding human biology, a common analytic pipeline that's widely used in genetics is called genome-wide association studies, or GWAS. So here, the goal is to look for genetic variants that are statistically correlated with the phenotype of interest, such as disease status. So here I'm showing you 24 different human chromosomes shown as vertical bars, and places within them that have known associations with different phenotypes that are marked by different colors. So this is a very popular study pipeline. Now we have more than 3,000 publications on GWAS, covering 60,000 unique associations across a wide range of phenotypes, including neurological disorders like Alzheimer's disease and very complex traits like height. So this is all great news, but we're still yet to reach the full potential of GWAS due to the following two reasons. The first is limited statistical power. So even though there are now data sets out there that include hundreds of thousands of individuals' genomes, some genetic signals are either too rare or too weak to be detected with these data resources. And to be able to identify these patterns, we need even larger sample sizes to have enough statistical power. Another limitation is lack of diversity. So a lot of the data repositories out there for genomic data tend to fall within organizational or national boundaries, which naturally lead to study populations that are relatively homogeneous in terms of ethnicity. And this limits our understanding of human genetics. So for example, there's this key diabetes gene that we weren't able to find until we looked at the Mexican population, because the mutation that was tagging for it wasn't found in the white European population, which is the population that most of these data sets focus on. So to overcome both of these limitations, we really need a way to share genomes across nations and institutions so that we can put together larger and more diverse genomic data sets. And this leads us to important privacy concerns. So not only do we not fully understand the full extent of information that can be inferred from one's genome, because one's genetic material is largely fixed at birth, once this data gets leaked, it's leaked for good. In recent years, there's been a lot of studies that show different ways of extracting sensitive information from genomic data, and this make these concerns more severe. So our proposal was to use MPC to allow researchers to analyze genomic data and to run GWAS studies without giving direct access to anyone for these sensitive genomic data sets. Since you're all experts on MPC, I don't need to describe how this actually works, but let me just mention that we adopt an MPC setting that's fairly standard in the field now, and especially one that's based on additive secret sharing, use server-aided pre-processing model where we introduce a trusted dealer that generates correlated randomness. We also use fixed point arithmetic subroutines since we need to be able to handle fractional numbers in our statistical analyses. And our initial protocol is based on semi-honest security, but you can imagine extending this to achieve active security using many of the techniques that previous speakers have spoken about in this workshop. So the idea to apply MPC to this GWAS problem has been around, but the key bottleneck for practical adoption has been that of scalability. And the main step in GWAS that poses a real problem is this step called population stratification collection. And here's the basic idea for it. So in GWAS, we're looking for correlations between genotypes and disease. And hopefully the findings that we get are linked to true risk factors that tell us something biological meaningful about the disease that can help us with drug development eventually. But there are other information sources that influence how genotype distributions are generated, such as ancestry patterns. So it might turn out that when we run a GWAS analysis, we'll get spurious findings that are linked to ancestry differences in the study population that actually has nothing to do with the disease. So a common way to account for this confounding factor in the analysis is to use something like principal component analysis, or PCA, on the genotype data to extract high-level data patterns in the genotype matrix. And these are it is believed that these high-level patterns capture ancestry patterns in the data set, and these are used as additional covariates in the statistical analysis. So unfortunately, PCA is a type of low-ranked matrix factorization algorithm that requires repeated multiplication over a large input matrix, and implementing this in existing MPC frameworks does not lead to a practical solution. So our main contribution in this work was to figure out how to design this protocol in a way that allows us to achieve full-scale secure GWAS with practical performance. So one key idea that we use that is worth a mention is that we generalize beaver triples. So here's the conventional setup of MPC where we have a set of input given as sacred shares. We want to compute some type of arithmetic circuit over these using MPC subroutines. And in the conventional technique, what we would do is for each of these multiplication gates, we would generate a multiplication triple, right? So if you have a lot of these multiplication gates in the circuit that we want to compute, then the amount of random data that we generate and communicate grows very large quickly. So what we did instead in our work was to take a more high-level approach and look at larger sections of the circuit at a time, and to push the randomness to the input and the output so that instead of having 3 random numbers per gate, we generate 1 random number per input and generate 1 and possibly a few more depending on the degree of the circuit for each output, so that overall the amount of random data depends on the input and output sizes and not the number of multiplication gates. So it turns out that this technique actually leads to more efficient secure computation building blocks for our purposes for the GWAS pipeline. So we use this to build better protocols for exponentiation, power iteration, which is a key step in the PCA algorithm, and so on. We also leverage a couple of other techniques for scalability. One of them is randomized linear algebra for the PCA part of the protocol. So here the idea is instead of applying PCA to the original genotype matrix, which is very large, you can think million by million matrix, instead of doing that, we've reduced it down to a random subspace and apply PCA there and use that as an approximate solution to the original problem. So this reduces the complexity of the circuit by a lot. We also use shared pseudorandom number generators between pairs of parties in the protocol. I believe one of the speakers mentioned this technique as well last week. So here the idea is that in many places in our protocol, we often have one party that's sampling a lot of random numbers and transfer that over to a different party. So instead of doing that, we can just have them share a common seed for the PRG and have them independently sample from the same random stream. So this way, we can actually reduce the communication complexity by a lot. So here's the overview of our secure GWAS protocol. So we start with a set of study participants who bring their own private genotype and phenotype data. And these private data sets will be first secret shared with a set of computing parties. So we envision these to be academic labs or consortia who run these protocols. And these computing parties will execute the MPC protocol for running GWAS study, which includes all the standard steps of GWAS that I mentioned. And at the end, the results are combined to reveal the secret, and the final GWAS results are published. And as I mentioned, we're using a server-aided model, so we need a third party, the trusted dealer who generates these beaver triples and distributes them to the computing parties. So we evaluated this pipeline on real GWAS data sets of lung cancer, bladder cancer, and age-related macular degeneration, which is a type of eye disease. So this covers a range of different data set sizes from 9,000 to 23,000 individuals. And what I'm showing you here are the final GWAS results, which is basically, so it's shown as p-value. It's basically measuring the strength of correlation of each genetic variant with the disease. And we're comparing the number that's calculated by the MPC protocol with the ground truth based on the plain text data. And as you can see across the board, our protocol generates output that is highly accurate. And if you actually look into the top associations that we find for each of these data sets, they also accurately match the ground truth. And I want to highlight that our top 2 hits for the lung cancer data set, these 2 genes, TERT and VTI1A, these actually turn out to be the exact 2 same top hits that the original publication reported as novel findings. And these are well-established lung cancer genes at this point. So what this is telling us is that it is actually possible to obtain these biologically meaningful results without giving anyone direct access to the raw genotypes and phenotypes. And it's also important that we're able to achieve this within a reasonable runtime. So here I'm showing you the runtime and the communication bandwidth of the protocol over a range of different dataset sizes. We simulated up to 100,000 individuals based on super sampling the benchmark datasets we had. The different color lines are for different phases of the protocol, and the black line is for the total number. So the key takeaways is that overall, both of these metrics depend linearly on the number of individuals. On all three of our benchmark data sets, our runtime is within a couple days. And if you extrapolate these numbers to a very large number, say 1 million individual GWAS, the runtime that we get based on this figure is around 2 months. But we were recently able to get this down to 2 weeks of runtime for 1 million individuals, which we think is well within the practical realm, especially considering that a lot of these researchers currently need to wait months just to get access to these data sets. So in the second half of this talk, I want to switch gears a little bit and tell you about how we could leverage these MPC techniques for a problem in a different biomedical domain, namely pharmacological machine learning. So drug discovery, as you may know, is a very expensive procedure that takes years of research and a lot of resources. And faced with declining productivity in recent years, big pharma companies are now exploring a more collaborative approach to drug discovery, where they try to pull together their data, knowledge, and resources to find new drug candidates together. However, existing partnerships for collaboration are largely limited in scope due to conflicting financial interests, including those related to intellectual property claims. So this is a key barrier to data sharing in this domain. A key step in the drug discovery pipeline is to predict novel drug-target interactions, or DTIs. So given a set of interactions that we know already between chemical compounds and protein targets, we may want to ask whether a given compound could be repurposed to target a different protein for a different disease, or whether an entirely new compound shows any bioactivity for protein targets of interest. Now, this interaction space is very large, given millions of compounds and tens of thousands of proteins. So exhaustively characterizing these interactions using experiments is infeasible. So commonly, people adopt computational models that leverage known set of interactions, and so they train on these observed interactions and prioritize unknown interactions to follow up in lab experiments. So if we had a platform where we could pull together these data across multiple parties, then we can hope to put together larger training data and increase the accuracy in these computational models. But there are data privacy concerns associated with that. So there could be interactions that are financially valuable that the companies may not be willing to share with others, or they might be working with entirely new chemical compounds that they cannot reveal without any legal protection. So simply asking everyone to share the data is not a viable approach to collaboration. So in this work, we propose to use MPC to tackle this problem, where we allow multiple collaborating entities with their own list of privately observed DTIs to pool their data securely and run an MPC protocol together to train predictive machine learning models and obtain predictions from them. And these trained models and the obtained the predicted interactions are distributed back with the collaborating entities as a reward for participation in this protocol. So the MPC setup is the same as what we use for the GWAS work. But here, the difference is that now we're running gradient descent training process for ML models instead of computing a statistical quantity as in GWAS. So since we're secret sharing the entire data, we're hiding not just the interaction patterns, but also the identities of the drug compounds and also the protein targets as well. So how is DTI prediction normally done in plain text? So there are two main branches of methods in the literature. So one is based on matrix factorization, where the set of known interactions between drugs and targets are represented as a matrix, a sparse matrix, and some form of low-rank matrix factorization is applied to this matrix to find a structure within this matrix to try to fill in the missing entries. A different branch of methods view this matrix as a graph instead and apply graph algorithms like network diffusion or random walk process to try to propagate information over this graph structure so that we can predict missing edges in this graph. So if you were to take these state-of-the-art plaintext methods and implement them in MPC, we actually end up getting something that's not really practical. And this is mainly due to the fact that these algorithms depend quadratically on the size of the data set, that is the number of drugs and the targets. And doing that in MPC is just not feasible given millions of drugs that we might get through collaboration. So in our work, we had to turn to an entirely different approach, especially one that's based on a neural network. So we start by summarizing the chemical and structural properties of these drugs and proteins as a feature vector. For the chemical compound, we use what's known as structural fingerprint, or ECFP. So this is a standard way of summarizing a chemical structure. For protein targets, we use the protein domain profile from the PFAM database, which is basically a set of known functional domains within a protein that we use as a feature vector. So given this, we feed this through a neural network model to try to predict whether a given pair of chemical compound and protein interacts or not. And we introduce some design decisions to make this more amenable for efficient MPC, like the choice of nonlinear activation function of this neural network, as well as the loss function. So both of these components will look something like what's shown on the slide. So it's a piecewise function of 2 segments, and it requires only a single secure comparison to compute. So the idea is to take this model and train it on a secret share interaction data set using MPC, using a standard gradient descent process. And the reason why this is more scalable than the plaintext methods that I described in the previous slide is that now we're taking linear passes over the training data as opposed to something that depends quadratically on the number of compounds in the data set. So we took this MPC protocol and evaluated them on DTI benchmark data sets. So drug bank is a very popular one that's used by DTI prediction literature. So this one contains 2,000 interactions. So it's quite small, but this one is highly curated. So all these interactions are high confidence ones. We also used a much larger data set called Stitch, which includes 1.5 million interactions covering 500,000 chemical compounds. This one includes functional interactions in addition to physical interactions. So there's more noise in the data set, but the sheer size of it allowed us to test the scalability of our pipeline. So here are some cross-validation results where we hold out a subset of the data for testing a model that's trained on the rest of the data in a repeated manner. So on the drug bank data set, we are actually able to achieve a competitive accuracy that's even slightly better than the state-of-the-art DTI-net method. And the key thing to note here is that our protocol never sees the raw data, right? And all these baseline methods are actually run using plaintext data. On the much larger Stitch data set, we actually noticed that a lot of these baseline methods could not actually scale to this data because of their quadratic memory requirement. So we could only compare to relatively simple matrix factorization based methods. And in this setting, we were actually able to obtain a fairly large improvement in prediction accuracy using our training process. And again, this is with the additional guarantee of data privacy. So these models are obtained within a reasonable runtime, which is reassuring. So here I'm showing you the runtime per epoch, which is a single training pass through the data set as a function of data set size, so number of interactions. So even for data sets including millions of interactions, our training time is within a couple of days. And all of the results that I showed you are based on a model that was trained after 1.5 epochs, so still within a few days. So we wanted to go beyond cross-validation and to actually demonstrate that one can use this type of MPC pipeline to obtain a model that can get novel findings. So here what we did was we trained the model on the entire Stitch dataset, basically pretending that this dataset was pulled together from multiple sources, and we're never giving anyone direct access to the dataset. And we prioritize unknown interactions, and here I'm showing you the top predictions based on 2 versions of our model that have to do with different ways of sampling the negative examples. So in both cases, many of our top predictions were validated using literature evidence or also by our own lab experiments. So the ones that have asterisk next to them are the ones that we were able to test in a lab setting. So just to point out a few cool examples, the top prediction in both cases between duloxetine and estrogen receptor alpha and beta, these are actually well-established interactions that reached clinical trial phase 3, but were later dropped because the company was able to find an even more effective drug for the same targets. But this is a real interaction that was somehow omitted from the data set. We have a similar story for seocalcital and vitamin D receptor. This is also a real interaction that went to clinical trial, but was later dropped. Perhaps more interestingly, we were also able to find an entirely novel interaction between this drug called imatinib and protein called ERBB4, and we were able to validate this in a lab experiment. So again, similar to the GWAS setting here, we're able to see that using MPC protocols, we can obtain these results that are biologically meaningful without giving anyone direct access to it. So just to quickly summarize, I hope I convinced you that we now have all the tools needed to build these practical MPC protocols for key biomedical research workflows for certain tasks. And I showed you 2 examples of this. One key observation we had is that at least currently, black box application of MPC frameworks is often insufficient. So right now, it is very important to come up with MPC-friendly algorithms and protocol design to achieve practical performance for many of these problems. I just wanted to mention that we're actively working on deploying these methods in practice, so I hope you'll be able to hear an update from us in the near future. So with that, I want to thank my co-authors of the papers that I described to you today, David Wu, Brian He, and Bonnie Berger. I also acknowledge my colleagues at the Brit Institute with whom I'm working, continuing to work on these directions, and I thank you for your attention.
Thanks very much, Hyun. That was a great talk. So there aren't any questions right now. I just want to say I'm very excited to hear about the upcoming deployment of this. Okay, so if there's no questions, then if anyone has more questions about the talks from today or other talks, put them in the Zulip chat platform. Okay, there's one question in chat just popped up, which is which MPC platform did you use? Or did you code it yourself from scratch, I guess?
We did code it ourselves from scratch. It wasn't too bad, although we did implement a lot of the basic building block protocols, like comparison and division, things like that based on the literature. But it is a new library. It is publicly available. You can find the link in our papers.
Okay, nice. Actually, I guess I have a related question. So maybe specifically for this upcoming deployment, do you think people view semi-honest security as enough for these types of medical applications, or would they really like to have something malicious if possible?
I think the current thinking is that the scalability concern is big enough that like the more we can trim down the runtime, the better. So that's why we started with semi-honest security. But I can definitely see the option for malicious security being appealing to practitioners. So I'm currently thinking about doing that as well.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Well, thanks again, and thanks again to all the speakers from today. We will be back tomorrow. Goodbye, everyone.